Good afternoon, everyone. Let us introduce ourselves first. My name is Jonathan Taniharjo as the first author, and my colleague, Rex Stardy, as the second author. And we are from Bunda Mulia University. First of all, we would like to express our gratitude for this opportunity. Our topic today is about the use of authentic materials in developing grammar proficiency.
Introduction. Uh, when it comes to language teaching, one of the most strenuous tasks for educators is how to catch students' attention and to get their motivation to learn, especially in learning grammar. Since grammar, the system, and the structure of language is somewhat hard and tedious to learn. Besides, grammar is believed to be of little importance to most people, particularly language learners. Despite the fact that lexis, which people have acquired, is more vital in a conversation, rules of language equally play substantial role in language mastery. It is true that extensive vocabulary will definitely help people share their thoughts and understand messages that others pass on. However, an improper use of language structure may result in misinterpretations. It has been a common practice that grammar books are the preferred tool to aid educators to teach language rules. However, the fact that grammar book is generally a nuisance to many learners makes it even harder to understand the rules of a language inside and out. Regardless of any situation that educators find themselves in, they always have to figure out a way to attract students' attention and to promote their learning, one of which is the utilization of authentic materials, which possibly make the learning process more enjoyable. In addition, authentic materials will definitely give learners something beyond the limitations of uh, lessons. That's why this study is trying to find out if the authentic materials are effective in transferring knowledge, especially grammar. Next is about scope and limitation. So in this study, we only analyze the gerund and to infinitive with verb. Uh, we do not include verbs and adjectives, which is followed by a preposition, like interested in, fond of, uh, keep on, etc. Next is about the research question. So this is our research question. Do authentic materials like a short film work better in enhancing students' knowledge of the gerund and the infinitive? Okay, next is about previous studies. So there are three previous studies which are related to this study. The first one is conducted by Musafi in 2012. Uh, the title of the study is about the success of authentic versus non-authentic oral materials on EFL learners' listening comprehension. The purpose of his study was to discover the impact of the authentic versus non-authentic listening materials on the listening comprehension of Iranian EFL subjects. Participants were divided into two experimental treatment groups, and then the results of his study is that the participants with authentic radio tapes instructions gain a higher degree of listening comprehension and proficiency than non-authentic groups. And then the second previous study is conducted by Tani Harjo, 2018. The title of the study is about the effect of authentic materials on EFL learners' collocations competence. The focal point of the study was only verb-noun combination. And then the result of this study displayed that there was an apparent increase in the post-test compared with the score of the pre-test. In other words, the students benefited from the authentic materials in the lexical collocation competence. And then the last one is also from Tanyarjo, 2021. The title of his study is about the effectiveness of authentic materials in promoting EFL students' grammatical collocation competence. The focus of his study was three collocation combinations. The first one is noun preposition, second one is preposition noun, and then the third one is adjective preposition. The result of his study showed that the authentic materials did not contribute to the students' awareness of the use of grammatical collocations in the post-test. To put it differently, the authentic materials were not successful at promoting students' grammatical collocation competence. So, from the previous studies above, we are still curious to find out whether such materials, such authentic materials, may work better in another situation. In the study, the instruments that we used to help students learn the rules of grammar, especially the gerund and to infinitive, was a snippet in a short film from which such grammatical rules are used. Okay, the next part is about the research method. There are 68 participants of the second semester students from the English department in Bunda Mulia University. And then there are 37 students in the control group. Meanwhile, there are 31 students in the experimental group. And then the test instruments that we used in the study is pre-test and also post-test with 25 items on the gerund and to infinitive with verbs. The verbs assessed were categorized into 4 types. The first one is verbs followed with to infinitive, such as try, want, get. And then the second category is verbs followed with gerund, such as miss, suggest. And then the third one is verbs, which is followed with gerund and to infinitive with no change in meaning, such as continue, the verb continue. And then the last category is verbs, which is followed with gerund and to infinitive with a change in meaning, such as the word remember, stop, and regret. Okay, so there are three stages for both experimental and control group. The first stage was doing the pretest. So this was conducted in order to know their prior knowledge and the students' prior knowledge. And then the second stage was conducting the treatment. The control group with traditional tool. They are using traditional tool while the experimental group was using the authentic materials. The traditional tool here is what is meant by traditional tool here is the grammar book. Yeah, so the control group is using grammar book. Meanwhile, the authentic materials, which is used in experimental group, is taken from short film with 6 minutes duration. And then the last stage was conducting the post test. It was conducted in order to know their improvement after given the treatment. And then the tool that we use in this study is SPSS program. So we need this SPSS to process the data later. And then we compare the scores of the pre-test and the post-test from both groups in order to see the effectiveness. And then we also see which verbs that had an improvement of the number of correct answers from both groups.
From this point on, it's going to be my part. In these findings, we can see right here that there are 37 participants in the control group, whereas there are 31 students in the experimental group. And the average score of the pre and the post test of the control group was 63.57 and 66.81, while the average score of the pre-test and the post-test of the experimental group was 64.52 and 66.84. And there was an increase of 3.24 points for the control group, and there was also an increase of 2.32 points for the experimental group. In order to discover which instruments were more effective in the teaching of grammar rules, specifically the gerund and infinitive, we use SPSS program. In the table, we can see right here that in pair 1, the degree of freedom is 36, which has a t-score of 1.928, while in the second pair, the DF was 30 and the t-score is 1.044. Here's a summary of the table. There are two pairs. Pair 1 is the control group and pair 2 it is the experimental group. We can see right here the t-score from the table and the score from the two-tailed t-distribution table. With this score lower than those 5% and 1% significance, it can be concluded that the old or the traditional instrument, which is book, is not so effective to increase the students' understanding and awareness. And in pair 2, with this t-score of 1.044 and the score from the distribution table, We can see right here that 1.044 is lower than the t-score of 5% significance and 1% significance, meaning that authentic materials were not of significance as well in the teaching of grammar. Okay, here is the list of the gerund and infinitive with verbs that we had in the test. And we can also see there were number of students with correct answers in the pre and the post test for control and experimental groups. We can see right here there were some students who initially got them correct in the pretest. In the end, after the treatment, they made a mistake. And in the control group, there were 7 verbs that were problematic, and there were 8 mistakes, or there were 8 verbs which were problematic to students of the experimental group. Here's another thing that we found. There were 5 most problematic verbs in the pretest result of both the control and experimental groups, namely suggest, look forward, neglect, stop, and prefer. While there were also most problematic verbs in the post test. In the control group, we found look forward, regret, and prefer, while in the experimental group, we found suggest, look forward, mean, and regret. From these findings, we can conclude that both instruments did help increase the citizen awareness of the application of the verbs. But there were only some, and not all verbs had an increase, because there was also a decrease from both groups. Conclusions and suggestions. There are 2 things that we would like to give. The first one, authentic materials are indeed a good way to learn natural and real language in context. Even so, in this study, authentic materials were of minor significance in transferring knowledge of the gerund and to infinitive, and so are grammar books. Despite the fact that authentic materials were not so effective in this study, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is true to everyone in different situations. The second one is that one possible justification for such instruments, authentic materials and the grammar book, to fail to show the effectiveness in developing grammar proficiency is that language rules are something that needs continual practices to make it perfect. In other words, giving a treatment when learning a language, especially language rule, only one time proves to be insufficient, and thus constant repetition is highly recommended. And that is all for our presentation. Thank you very much, and see you next time.